Welcome to Great Karate Myths, Debunking the Legends. Today, we're stepping off the mat and into the stories that built the martial arts world, the legends behind the myth. We're looking at the superhuman feats of Choki Motobu and Oyama to see where history ends and the marketing begins. Stick around as we discuss why we love a good hero story and why the truth might actually be more useful for your training. Nathan.
Certainly. So anyone with any kind of hobby or interest likes all the, not only the merchandise that goes with it, but the stories and the heroes and the tales. I'll give an example. Here in England, or perhaps I should say more properly, Cornwall, Tintagel, a splendid place, replete with the myths of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and sort of the legend. Great place to be, spectacular. The composer Arnold Bax wrote some tremendous, in fact, a piece called Tintagel, inspired by. Great place, full of mythology. That's my point. And the martial arts are the same. So if I quickly start with Kung Fu and say, well, there's always the standard legendary material is the Shaolin Temple. And that was done fantastically in the 70s with the series called Kung Fu, just that starring David Carradine. And it was a cult classic. It ran for some years and it was incredibly popular. It raised a generation of martial arts enthusiasts. But Shaolin Temple's not the only one. That the Chinese, so that's something that rang really hugely, but both within China, but also abroad in the West. And meanwhile, back at the ranch in China, the Feng Sai-yuk legends were really popular, and these depicted a hero who sprang from the end of the Ming Dynasty. Well, actually, usually it's the Qing, 1644-45. Yeah, he was a legendary, rebellious sort of uber Chinese hero, and I think the most celebrated version of it. I think they were making TV and films of the Feng Sai legend since the end of the 40s. So, but the classic one I think was the one starring Jet Li. I think it was 1993. Which really sort of kind of captured it pretty well. So we've got the Shaolin Temple and the Feng Sai, and this whole sort of mythological, how mythology can feeds into training and enthusiasm and the marketing basically of an interest, or dare I say a product. The same thing happened in the karate world with various legendary characters who did legendary things. If it's not fighting bulls or smashing bricks or feats of strength, it's something to do with the sort of quasi heroic nature of the martial arts person. Nearly said man. So the martial arts have always been infused with these sort of legendary characters, but it's not actually only Asian martial arts. Another example in England, I gave one, King Arthur. Another one of my favourite as a child, Robin Hood. A chap who probably may well not have even existed. Same with Feng Sai-yuk, same with any of these. But they inspire people to emulate the feats of the heroes. You can see the same thing with Greek mythology.
I was just when I was thinking about the sort of the mythological figures there that Nathan was talking about, and I think what's really interesting particularly with the martial arts, and particularly as modern karate as we've as we've inherited it. A lot of sort of I don't want to say mythological. That's probably that's far too strong and making it a bit too highbrow. But there are the legendary feats of certain well-known figures within modern karate history, where and I'm sure that we're quite familiar with them. Nathan mentioned the bullfighting and stuff, but there are a number of characters who have had sort of legendary feats attached to them, and I don't think we necessarily have to rehash all of the stories necessarily in their detail. But there's just a couple of themes that I really wanted to sort of pick up on, which shine through when you look at those stories sort of collectively. One really common theme is the idea of the individual who trains really, really hard in a largely sort of undefined way. But there's this theme of building the person, the individual who either goes off into the wilderness and takes themselves off on their own and puts themselves through the kind of training that would probably kill a lesser mortal. They do all of this hard training, and then they become this kind of like superhuman, who's able to fell opponents with a single blow. So there's that theme of the superhuman result of hard training, and then we've got sort of a mixture of character archetypes in the in these legends as well. We've got the sort of refined, learned schoolmaster, which sort of got embodied in Funakoshi, but we've also got the sort of brawler, the rough and ready fighter. We find that in Choki Motobu. So there are from where I sit, there are some interesting common themes which are I would describe them as legendary, not necessarily mythological, but it's from where I sit, it's all it's geared towards promoting this idea that karate can create this, under the right conditions, create these amazing fighters. And I think these legends have they're entertaining for sure, but I think that they've grown with modern karate as a way of promoting the idea that karate is for creating open hand, bare-fisted, superhuman fighters. And I'm sure that many people don't actually give too much credence to the details of these stories, but those ideas, they take root, and they are a motivator, something to mimic in people's minds.
I think just following on from Matt there, it's interesting how these these legends and these stories have found their way into lending some credibility to styles, or the development of particular styles, or the kind of functionality or of these different systems of karate. And in Shoshin Nagamine's book, Tales of Okinawa Masters, in the introduction, he outlines a few things, and he describes karate. And one of the things he says about it is that kata is absolutely central to any karate style and karate. And what I think is, I don't think any of these stories lend any credibility whatsoever, or imply anything, or tell us anything about the kata that he suggests as central to karate. But I think that they are used in that way. Just, continuing from Matt again, with the example of Choki Motobu, who's considered
to be, the real fighter and, brought all the practical experience and the kumite. If there's a bit of Choki Motobu in the lineage, it kind of lends some gravitas. Or it must be a functional style. It must be leaning towards the more kind of practical end of things. Or if it's Gichin Funakoshi, they're considered philosophical, the Budo, all of those different aspects. It perhaps lean more towards that kind of thing. And I think these stories that kind of perpetuate these ideas, or increase the credibility and strength of the arguments, if you like. But yeah, I think my main point there is that it tells us nothing about the kata. So even though we know Choki Motobu practiced Naihanchi as the main kata that he practiced, and he practiced lots and lots of kumite, it doesn't actually tell us anything about Naihanchi as a form, and it doesn't tell us anything about the history, who created it, where it came from, how it found its way into Okinawa, and but it could be seen in the kind of Motobu, Ryu, or schools that have inherited Naihanchi and had some contact with Choki Motobu in the lineage, that it's really practical. It's for real fighting. And those are the suggestions that are quite common anyway. But I noticed there are trends with some instructors, for example, to lean on, in my opinion, Choki Motobu to kind of perpetuate their interpretation of Naihanchi, even though those stories about Choki Motobu fighting in the Tsuji district of Okinawa tells us nothing about Naihanchi. So, yeah.
I'm not sure about the eulogizing or praising somebody who effectively, allegedly, spent time brawling the red light district after ingesting copious amounts of alcohol. And I'm not really sure about that. Allegedly, here was a person who had 100 fights and never got, correct me if I'm wrong, chaps, never got hit in the face. 100 fights and never got hit in the face. Yeah, maybe, no disrespect to Motobu Choki Sensei, but maybe his opponents had more to drink than he did.
There's another thing that's said about Choki Motobu, and I don't know if he says it himself in his own book. I think he does. He highlights that he practiced Naihanchi several hundred times a day. And that was kind of one of the core elements of his training. So he's known for kumite and developing fixed pairs and regularly changing them, and for the fights. So you could kind of quite easily come to the conclusion, well, the Naihanchin and the kumite and the makiwara and everything, it must all be for real fighting. But practicing something several hundred times a day doesn't mean that anything is revealed about the kata or any understanding whatsoever. They're just quite spurious connections, but they're accepted connections. And we've already talked about Gichin Funakoshi's book, The Introduction to Karate, and in Henning Whitworth's translation, he references Jacob Heppel's bare knuckle boxing book at the back. And looking at Choki Motobu's pairs, for example, I wonder if there's not a connection to a Western boxing manual in that. And then it's kind of drawn a bit closer in the way that it's discussed in Naihanchin, and before you know it, it's Naihanchi Kumite or something like that, whatever that might mean. So, yeah, these things kind of, people can draw quite a lot of conclusions from them. And they've almost become like Barnum statements. So Choki Motobu says, I practiced Naihanchin 200 times or 300 times a day. So lots of people that are really interested in the history of karate, and Choki Motobu is one of the titans of karate history. Oh, well, he did it several hundred times a day. It must be really important. Karate's for fighting. No Hanshin's and before you know it, you've got an entire, 3-volume novel written about it, just based on the fact that he said he practiced it a few hundred times a day.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? That practicing Naihanchi 200 or 300 times a day, and some people might get the idea that that's what they need to do. And just completely overlook the fact that the kumite that he felt obliged to create looked nothing like Naihanchi. So if Naihanchi was so wonderfully practical for fighting, why would you need to develop kumite that looked nothing like it?
Well, also a prerequisite surely would be that you know what the kata does. So you can practice something hundreds of times a day. I'm not sure what good that's going to do you, apart from exercise, if you don't know what it does, what it's for. I had a friend once. Reminds me of. He said to me, "I've written 100,000 words. I've just got to put them in order." You need to know what you're doing, what you purpose, and you can practice. I think that's a faith issue, and I'm not against faith. I'm quite pro-faith. That's fine. People have faith. It's their choice, and faith can move mountains. But practicing a kata several hundred times a day, if you don't know what it's for, then yeah, okay. Once you've got the mechanics and the sequence and the mechanics and polished it a bit, what's the point? Are we going to sit in the kindergarten class and just chant A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, as the Americans say, Z? Are we going to do that just every day? Yeah, but it's okay for 5-year-olds, but not for grown, not for adults.
I can't understand why somebody needs to practice a kata several hundred times a day. It doesn't make any sense to me, especially if they don't even know what it does. And to
I
apply
think that's exactly. It suggests he doesn't know what it's for.
Yeah, and to apply that in kumite, I don't think so. And as you said, his kumite looked nothing like Naihanshin, so the two don't go together. It's very strange.
It's difficult to make an objective evaluation of Motobu Choki Sensei's kumite without risking offending people. But if you were to sort of block off his face and his very characteristic shortened gi bottoms, and and then asked somebody, maybe a good Dan grade in Shotokan or Goju or some such, what they made of the technical standard, I can guess the answers. I can guess the responses. And Kev's observation is absolutely accurate, that his kumite looked nothing like his beloved Naihanshin. Now, I'm personally deeply grateful to Motobu Choki Sensei. I called him that title because the foot positioning, the foot placement in his Naihanshin stance is perfect, is excellent, is really good. And it is inspirational because by the time Shotokan had changed it, Shotokan had changed it. They'd lowered the stance, stopped performing Naihanshin stance, and created an entity called Kibudachi, which was an exaggerated sort of horse stance, which lost the whole point of the internal toed foot position and completely disassociated from the name, internal divided conflict, if you accept that translation. That those feet are toed in for a reason, and Motobu Sensei did it perfectly, really well. Although he did adapt the hand positions, he raised the height of the hand positions, which were later was copied by the founder of Wadaru, who spent a little bit. I think Nagamine Shoshin Sensei and Otsuka Hironori were influenced by Motobu, but not so much Nagamine Sensei. More Otsuka, the founder of Wadaru Karate, who raised the hand positions. So the actual technical form of Motobu Sensei was fine, but again, the applications is kumite, and no thanks. But his also very important is Nagamine Shoshin said Motobu Sensei had real difficulty forming a ryuha, any kind of traditional style. And the reason that Nagamine Shoshin Sensei gave was that Motobu's karate kept changing it. He kept changing the kumite, the purposes, the meanings, the distances. And one can see what was happening. He was experimenting and trying to develop, but he didn't achieve what Otsuka Sensei or Funakoshi Sensei did achieve, which was to establish a sound ryuha. Motobu Choki Sensei did not manage to do that, and people should not be fooled by the use of the traditional family Motobu Ryu, because it's not clear that Motobu Choki Sensei is actually the author. There is a lot of his material in there, and it is the case that his relatives and associates have tried to collect his material, but it's hard to believe that the current product is one that Motobu Choki Sensei would have actually approved of himself.
I think that's the important point as well, Nathan, about Choki Motobu experimenting and changing, because that's quite inspiring, isn't it? So it can kind of compel you to take more interest in the other things that are said, because you think, well, here's someone who's learning through experience, experimenting, developing. So you think, well, they must be quite switched on. So therefore it could lead you, well, they practice no hanshi several times a day. This experimenter / fighter / all the rest of it. Oh, okay. So that it kind of then my hanshin's really important. We must practice it lots and lots and lots. But again, it tells us absolutely nothing about the kata. And so it's kind of, you get locked into that cult of personality, as you described it before, Nathan, and we spend more to try to think about, well, they did this and they did that, but it can be a distraction. And going back to the episode where we were talking about the method, it would be easy to get distracted almost by looking at these things as a way of trying to understand the kata, and instead of just going to the kata itself and deep diving into that. You could get lost, couldn't you? The more I practice no hanji, the more I'm going to get from it. It's just not true at all. It doesn't reveal anything about it. So yeah, I think that there are elements of these legends that make us trust more or believe more or something like that. So therefore it adds credibility to all the other stuff that was said, when in fact it might not be that useful at all for those, for example, like us, who are trying to understand the kata themselves.
Yeah. Let's have some thoughts. Going back to the original start to this, with the David Carradine and Bruce Lee analogies, and you can see the same thing. I mean, I can remember people were really inspired by that series, the Kung Fu series, with Bruce Lee, and I'm sure, well, I'm pretty damn sure it had a massive influence on things like Lao Ga, all the spinning kicks and head kicks and all that stuff. And of course, it's all based around acting and theatre, which links back to the theatre thing we've looked at previously. I kind of find that quite amusing, and people did buy into all that stuff. They really did, even though it's all choreographed, it's all acted out, it's not real, but people bought into it. And I think maybe it's a similar sort of thing that happens with these senses. I think it's the same sort of thing. People buy into an image, and they run with it.
was quite easy to. We said before, didn't we, about how complex the choreography is now,
Yes.
and you think it's very, very impressive. It's it's a art in its own right, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to say about a real fight or what the kata were originally intended for, and that's
It's exactly that. With how much kata did you learn from David Carradine and Bruce Lee? Not a lot.
done hopefully.
None.
Yeah.
Great entertainment now, and
Yeah.
that's what it was for. So we're looking at the Chinese opera on an international scale because it can be flashed out right into people's homes in millions of television sets. So that's pretty incredible. And let's face it, it was entertaining. And I think the use of the word legends, it is totally appropriate because I think I would, myths is a bit stronger, but I think myths are sort of built up but like they're like a vocabulary. Legends are kind of essays. They're the stuff that builds up myths. I think that they go right across the board in every culture. A good example would be just DC Comics. Come on, it's time to admit, gentlemen, you got to, is it Superman or Batman? Which, well, you can like them both, but you've probably got a favorite, and you can lay a case for either. Superman is just Superman, it says it all. Batman can't fly, but he's so cool and he has gadgets and this incredible utility belt. Once again, these are sort of heroic figures that are sort of, and they're entertaining, and that's what I think was done with the martial arts. It returned into that. I will use the term myth making because we've termed so much of what we're doing the myth, but it's careless to dismiss them as fantasies. They are motivators, advertisements, provokers and promoters. They get people to want to do things, and I think that's not a bad thing, as long as they don't encourage people to do dangerous, foolish, or criminal things.
Of course, they're also sort of local legends, aren't they? It's based on the same thing. I remember years ago, documentary about a bare knuckle boxer, gypsy boxer. There's all he was actually not a very nice person. He's there's things like that, isn't there? The local legends as well are built up in a similar way. I'm sure every area's got them. It's a similar sort of thing, I think.
Well, one that always gets drawn into karate is an alleged Shaolin connection, and Funakoshi writes about it. It's come through, all of the major players, the major style and system founders in karate, all at some point have talked about Shaolin and a Shaolin connection. And of course, there's the historical Shaolin, and then there's the fictional Shaolin. And again, it lends weight to, well, this is inherited from Shaolin, so there must be. And I think that they're leaning on the fiction here a little bit. Well, massively actually, because it's the stage representations that are where the invulnerability and blades can't cut through skin, all that kind of iron body and all that stuff. It's stage performative, but you get some of these secret skills are inherited, and so leaning on that connection, or Shorin, Shaolin, and all the rest of it, is really, really suggestive. So people might be led to think that their kata are in some way inherited from Shaolin. I'm not saying they're not, because I don't know. I can't speak to all of them, but they might believe that there's far more to it in terms of their relationship with Shaolin than the reality that karate was made up. Most of it was made up in the last 100 years using semantic Chinese forms. And so, yeah, don't ever let the truth get in the way of a good story.
It's almost like their version of Camelot or Sherwood Forest.
Yes. I was just thinking about the legend about the guy, the karate sensei who was supposed to have knocked out cat balls and stuff like that. Is that the one you were talking about at the beginning? Is that the same person?
True.
There are two versions. There's
Okay.
the latest one, the most probably the most common one, is actually not the first one, not the Matsumura. It's the Oyama Masatatsu.
Right. So I remember the reading about that later on. One of them, and what it turns out is that the bull he was supposed to have knocked out with his tremendous punch was actually tied down, so it couldn't do anything. It was actually tied up, so he was hitting it to knock it out or whatever he did to it, but the thing was tied up, so it couldn't have charged him or defended itself. And I remember reading that, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I read years ago.
Yeah, there's film footage of it which I've seen, and
Yes.
one of my friends had a teacher who was actually present at Oyama's original, and the story goes that they set up shop next to a knacker's yard, next to a I don't know what it's called, just a place where they slaughter the animals. But this apparently, and it doesn't look like a fully grown bull. And the big thing that kind of captured, that was done for the camera. There's a not knocking Oyama Masatatsu. He's a very well thought of, but there's a bit of promotion and acting going on there. And he, it was chopping off the horn of the animal that got the acclaim. But my source, and I can't verify this, my source suggested that horn had been partially sawn through, which does kind of make sense because, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm not knocking the founder of Kyokushin Karate. He founded a style that's global and was a very, very popular karate master. Not to everyone's taste though, and the mix of kata and the approach taken in Kyokushin is very specific. Sufficient to say that it's a very eclectic style, and it was very much promoted by someone who did exactly what Matt was talking about earlier. Took himself off into the mountains to train alone. Allegedly, in his own autobiography, one of them, he shaved off an eyebrow to prevent his returning to civilization, and put himself through all sorts of self-designed training regimes, including punching trees, and then came back down, I believe 18 months later, to set up his own school. So this is exactly, and I use Matt's term, legendary stuff, which creates ultimately a myth, the myth of the man, or the legend of the man. The man, can distinguish between myth and legend. The man who is larger than life and, a character that we would like to aspire to copy his feats of strength. Particularly interesting for probably young men.
It's interesting with the Masayama example because if I remember rightly, one of his senior students also wrote that the bull had been drugged as well. And when I was in South Korea some years ago, I was amazed at how popular Masayama was. By one of his Korean names, Cheba Dal, and how he was sort of known. He was a commonly known character, and I was amazed at how many people had heard of. They always asked me when that people knew I did karate or was it liked martial arts. They always said, "Have you heard of Cheba Dal?" And he'd chop the horn off a bull. And there was a very popular film that came out in Korea, and so it's kind of. It doesn't really matter that the bull was drugged or that the horn had been tampered with. None of those things really matter. And all the facts, they're readily available. You don't have to search far for any of this stuff. But what finds its way into common perception is that there was this deadly guy who trained on his own in the mountains, and he chopped the horn off a bull, and he was, and so then it adds this credibility to the style, doesn't it? It's like, woof, if you do Chokushinkai or whatever, you kind of stepping into that world, that level of training and that sort of combative ability and things like that. And, it could be argued that it was Masayama's students, that senior guys that had the more ability perhaps than he did. Certainly the likes of John Blooming as well, and characters like that. But anyway, it's just kind of pulling it back. He practiced Sanshin, he practiced Tensho, he practiced Naihanchi, and there's footage of him doing that. So you can see it on YouTube. There's a video of Masayama doing Naihanchi, I believe. And again, all these stories. It must be really important. Is this part of the deadliness? And so it's easy to draw conclusions again, isn't it, from these kinds of legends and stories?
Yes, just to prop that up, I think Oyama Masakatsu was he put out a number of really high quality hardback books published by Japan publications, I think, and I'm not sure if he was with Kodansha, but certainly Japan publications, and he put out massive books. This is karate and what is karate, and they're very, very popular books in the day, in a time when there weren't as many books as there are now. Important. Here's the point. He wrote in one of them, and I do apologize, I've forgotten whether it was, I think it was in This is Karate, but I don't know, I could be wrong, might be What is Karate, but I remember what he wrote about Tensho or Rokushu, and this is what he wrote: a man who practiced Tensho 10,000 times would be able to defend himself perfectly. Well, I mean, that's quite a statement to make. So you can see what he's doing. He's selling his brand, which is sweat lots and do lots of repetitions. And that's exactly the approach that the Kyokushinkai or the Kyokushin schools take to this day. Lots of sweat, lots of hard work, lots of repetitions, to which I would quietly add, even if you don't know what the kata is for.
Doesn't Kyokushinkai not have any direct face punching? It's kicks to the head and punches to the body, isn't it? If I remember rightly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it had direct face punching.
No, you're absolutely right. So full power kicks are allowed to the head, but no punches to the head.
You can also knee to the head. They also knee to the head.
Yeah, they do.
But early on in the Kyokushinkai, they did allow face punching, but without gloves. Very rapidly, people started getting mangled. So anyway, that's something else.
At the end of the day, legends like Robin Hood or King Arthur inspire us to be better, and martial arts heroes are no different. But as we've discussed, don't let a good story get in the way of the actual truth of your kata. And these legends are the advertisements that get us through the door, but the real work happens in the dojo. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite platform, leave a review and share. We'll see you in the next episode.